creative friction is not absolutely a new idea. Creative friction is, how do we get constructive conversations going on about the differences that we have? And we'll come back to that point a little bit later. And it's been written about, and even in the previous speakers, we've been talking about, don't be afraid of diversity. Diversity is something that you can draw upon across a range of different things. And what we're really trying to do here is to respect the other idea and listen to it long enough to be able to break a pattern. And Jennifer had a really good example of, smoking. It's a habit. And Duhigg wrote about the book Habit. He talked about, how we just do the things the way that we've done them because that's the way we do them. And, it's something that we're comfortable with. Cirque du Soleil talk about, they take athletes and they bring them in and they break the habits of the discipline of the athlete to become an entertainer. And they do this with 3 simple words. They say curiosity, courage, adaptability. So be curious enough to go out and see, I wonder what this would be like. Have you got the courage to do something that's outside your comfort zone? And then are you adaptable enough to build that into the new you? And as human beings, we are comfortable in our area of, this is me. But you can be so much different to what you are. And that's where the organisational zoo and knowledge succession, and I've been writing about leadership in between, so knowledge leadership, how can you get the knowledge that you need in order to go forward? So let's just have a look at some of these ideas rather quickly. So if I said to you, tell me about this map, what would you say? Yeah, it's upside down. But does that make it wrong? Absolutely not. It is actually scientifically correct, right? Except the ice poles are now smaller, as we heard from Dr. Cole. So the idea of when you look at something, and I've had people argue with me that this is wrong. I go, really? As an Australian, I think it's actually more right than the previous version because it puts Australia front and centre. So you can explore these things. That conversation you can have for a long time about standardisation, recognised patterns, staying within what it is that you're doing, etc. So you can have that conversation for a long time. A lot of what I do is we gamify to play with new ideas, get people involved in the idea in a very safe and comfortable, inclusive way. We were talking about inclusivity a little bit earlier. Richard Crisp wrote a really good book earlier this year or late last year about social inclusion. He talked about in-groups and out-groups and how do you leverage that much better than what we currently do. So what I'm really talking about is the organisational zoo uses animal metaphor to give you a safe play environment to exchange ideas about behaviour. So rather than saying, Arthur, you're one of these or one of those, it's actually what kind of animals do we see in our zoo? The animal represents a behaviour, not the human being. Human beings are far too complex to be stuffed into a box. But what most psychometric profiles do is they go, well, you know what, you fit this box here, therefore that's what you can do. Now, good consultants don't use it that way. They say, here's the insights of your comfort zone, but that doesn't stop you from doing other things. The zoo actually turns it around completely and says, you can be any one of these animals, and the more you understand which animal to be in which environment, the more adaptable you become, the more courageous you become. And lo and behold, we heard the word outcomes in almost every talk so far, the more successful you become. The more adaptable you are, the more that you can engage in that environment with the right people, the more powerful that you become. And of course you can use that power for evil or you can use it for good, but it's up to you. I mean, no one in this room would think of anything other than using it for good. So, I have a student who's a fine arts student. I do a bit of teaching as well. And I asked him to draw a picture of the brain with all of the behavioural patterns. And deliberately we've left a few of these patterns out to say, well, which ones can you incorporate now? Which ones have you got already? And by the way, do you need to swap them over occasionally? So, if we look at disruption, okay, we talk about incremental improvement, and there's a whole bunch of, Clayton Christian literature and that sort of stuff on, incremental versus disruptive innovation. What we're talking about today is how do we change it completely? How do we get people through that metanoia of, metanoia just simply means a complete change of mindset. So Carol Dweck's work on completely changing the frame of mind of where you are. Do you have a growth mentality, a growth mindset versus a status quo one? So we want to get right over into here to look at the opportunities to create new outcomes. How do we make that connection? Well, one of them is to see your world in a fun way. You know, people go, oh, you know, calling someone an animal is so politically incorrect. And I go, well, actually it's not. People right throughout history have had a very close connection. I'm already missing my dog and I've only been away overnight, right? Or if you're a cat person, you know, you're probably missing your cat already as now. Now that I've made that point and it's gone into your brain, you go, you made me feel sad. You know, so, you know, you can manipulate people's thoughts and emotions very, very easily. And I use the word manipulate deliberately because it's provocative. But if I say, well, you know, I want to influence you as your mentor, you feel comfortable. But if I say, I want to manipulate you, but they're the same statement. I want to shift you from where you are now to somewhere else. But, you know, manipulate's got a bad rep, right? It's got the bikie outfit and all the tattoos, although so does everyone else in Sydney these days. You know, so our culture has changed over time. So the idea of looking at your zoo, looking at your team as a collection of behaviours is a really good way to explore. And we'll do that in the workshop later today. So, you know, you look at these teams and you say, well, this team here would be really good at that game because they got the right behaviours for that non-contact sport. And the football team have got the much more aggressive behaviours. And what happens if the football team plays the basketballers? You know, well, if they're playing basketball, they're all fouled off, but they've killed the other team because the behaviour is not appropriate to the game. They can be a good team, but they won't necessarily be a good team in every environment unless they can adapt their behaviour. So what we're really talking about here, this was something I drew on a whiteboard one day, and I thought, oh, I should take a picture of that. I might use it one day. That was about 6 years ago. What we've got with cultures is we've got what is the core expectations of that culture, and then is what else do we like? What will we tolerate and what won't we tolerate? But then when you put those two cultures over the top of each other, culture A and B, what actually happens here is you get these zones where what you expect and what I expect connect. Well, you know, we heard from a previous speaker, that's that sense of belonging. Yeah, this is where, you know, we feel comfortable in each other's company. But what do we talk about the most? What I expect and you won't tolerate, or what I expect and you don't like. We hit those points of, oh, I don't like Arthur, he's a bit different to me and he challenges me and he tells me I have to be courageous and I don't like that. I want to have a fight with him about that, or I want to sneak away and not talk to him again. Whereas in fact, where we need to get to is this idea of let's look at the differences, because you know what, if you see it differently to what I do, there's this opportunity now for me to learn something else that you know that I don't. So that's another conversation that you can start. The pictures are designed to give you conversations. This is actually an output of a workshop in Singapore from last year, where they went through and they classified all of the animals that we expect to see, those that we desire, those that we tolerate, those that we won't tolerate. And they defined their culture in what I call the behavioural DNA. We're going to do this for Disruption this afternoon. So one picture, 238 people working in 42 groups, and we can put it on a picture and we can look at it. And then they went and did, what kind of culture do we want to have? And then they compared them. They go, oh, less of this and more of that. How do we make that happen? And over the last 12 months, they have been deliberately and consciously moving their culture from where they were to where they need to be in order to achieve what they're trying to achieve. That's happening as we speak. In fact, I'm flying off to Sydney on Sunday and going back to see them again. Knowledge succession is 12 ideas around how do you make this happen. Knowledge succession is talked about, if you want to know success, how do you transfer the knowledge in the way? And you'll notice I chose a compass because it's not about setting the direction. A compass has infinite numbers of direction. You get to choose which one you take. So there's a whole range of things, and of course 12 points of the compass versus 12 chapters of the book, and it's just a kind of complete coincidence that there happens to be 12 lectures in a semester. So you've got to be thinking about all of these things and how to connect them in a way that makes a lot of sense. So we'll talk a little bit about that this afternoon. The other thing that we're doing is a bit like Disrupt Sydney. I love what's been happening here. What we've done is we're doing a connection across a whole range of different industries. We've got painters and singers and dancers, and we've got people from NASA, we've got people from Cirque du Soleil, and we're bringing all of these people together. We're going to put them in a room and say, right, what do we need to talk about? How do we share the ideas? What are the differences as to the way these industries run? And it's all about interactions between them. So we're actually doing this in in and across organisations. This is a picture that was in the book but then didn't quite make it. It came out because the book was getting too long. Apparently you're not allowed to write a book more than 150 pages anymore because nobody reads. It's the way it is, right? So I thought I'd share it with you anyway. So this is the first outing for this picture. What I do is I draw pictures, I use metaphors, things that represent the reality, and get people to talk about them. And we'll play a game with this this afternoon as well, where I'll give you a picture and say, how does that picture represent your organisation? And it's amazing what comes out. Because if I said, describe your organisation, people think in the current patterns. But if I give them a picture that's not related to the organisation, and now, how does that relate? They then need to think creatively outside of the current patterns to describe what that means. The conversations are amazing. They are just amazing. And you do get them all to write it all down first and then to share it in a small group, and then you build it up. And the nature of what comes out of those conversations is really insightful. It actually drives strategy if you want to take it to the next step, or it should. So what we're really trying to do here is, as educators, as leaders, we're not trying to fill your mind. We're actually trying to open it. And there's a big difference. If you look at traditional education, it's, I need to tell you all of this stuff and you need to go, and then you regurgitate it back into the exam, and then I'll give you a tick to say that was good. Where's the creativity? Where's the new thinking? Where's the co-creation of new knowledge? It doesn't exist. Whereas I say, hey, here's an idea. Now come back to me. Most of the assignments that I set the exec MBA students is, here's a word. Tell me how that relates to this context. And they've got to write 2,000 words around why that word is important, and they do it in a wiki where they can see what every other student have written about, and they need to relate it to all of their other topics as well. University goes, oh, they're going to cheat. I go, no, they can't, because they're all writing a different topic. So these are the things. How do we build that? Going back to Covey, circles of influence. Well, they're actually spheres, and they're increasing. They're like bubbles as they float to the surface. They get bigger and bigger. If you don't know what's going on that drives that expansion, you don't know where it's going. So one last thing, and then we'll stop, because I think we're done, right, with time. So what I'm really trying to say here is, if you understand the behavioural diversity, what kind of animals do you need? What kind of conversation are you having? Are you having a prioritisation conversation, or are you actually having, well, we heard brainstorming is no longer the thing, right? But whatever kind of conversation that you're trying to have, you need a different set of behaviours. Do you need to be critical? Do you need to be open and sensitive and exploratory? Decide on the kinds of behaviours you need for the kind of conversation you're having, and if you can actually set that up so that people buy into and trust what it is that you're doing. If you build trust, you build sharing. You build sharing, you build collaboration. You get new knowledge created, because we're now in a conversation that drives performance. If you don't deliberately decide what that environment is going to be, if you're not lucky enough to have a beautiful collaborative culture before you started, if you don't deliberately set that up as the leaders to create that environment, what happens is people don't trust. Oh, I don't know, there's Luke, he and I've got history, so you don't share, and if you don't share, you drive mistrust. If you drive mistrust, you reduce collaboration, which of course puts you in a really dark, dangerous place. It's great to talk with you.